The way we take care of ourselves is ever evolving.
And what we know for sure is that our mind and spirit are linked to our physical body.
And that our wellness seems to extend into our communities and the planet we all share.
It is very, very clear that wellness is interconnected.
We love spending time with you to explore and practice the breakthroughs, the insights, and the passions of incredible people helping us all see the world in a whole new light.
This is Health Gig.
So today on Health Gig, we have someone that Tricia and I knew when he was growing up, Mike Huffstetler, and we're going to talk about his exciting new product, almost new. But we want to start Mikey first because we're calling you Mikey because we knew you growing up. We want to start first to hear about you so other people can know where you grew up and a little bit about your life.
So I grew up in the DC area, which is obviously how I know you. And that was the same year as Ellie. And I don't know if you remember this, but I was a camp counselor for Robert and for Max and Casey.
I do remember that. And they remember it really well.
Yeah. And I haven't seen them in so long, but my mental image of them is, as young kids. I grew up in the DC area. I loved it. I was kind of didn't know what I wanted to do, when I grew up. I always kind of gravitated towards this idea of doing something that had impact and meaning. And I think growing up around Washington, I was initially really drawn to politics. And so I did 3 political internships. And the first was for Ted Kennedy on Capitol Hill. The second, in a major shift on the political spectrum, was in the Bush White House. I was an intern, and that was one of the greatest jobs I've ever had, and met some of my best friends there that, to this day, over 20 years later, are some of my best friends in the world. And then after that, I worked on the McCain campaign. And so when I graduated, I started doing political consulting for someone I worked for on the McCain campaign. And I think if you kind of look back at the internships, the thing that tied them all together was that they were for these great leaders that had, this very lofty image and understanding of what it means to be an American. And the political consulting wasn't that. And, I was less interested in that side of it. But the cool thing that happened in that experience was that we started working with this tech startup out of Boston. And that tech startup was really interested in working in the political realm because they had built software that helped monetize high affinity groups online. And the majority of their customers were nonprofits. And so they built these browser extensions that helped the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation or Best Buddies leverage their supporters' behavior online to help them raise additional funds. And I was really drawn to that. And that was very mission oriented. And so I, along with 2 other people, left the political consulting firm and went to work at this startup. And this was really interesting because it was this big shift for me and this new exposure into the startup world. And it was really, really fascinating. We had a really fun time. It was, all young people who had no idea what we were doing, trying to figure it out on the day-to-day. It felt like a campaign in many ways. It was super eye-opening. And since then, I've always worked in startups. I went to Chicago, worked at this place called 1871. It was super special. That became a startup hub in Chicago. Moved to New York, started working at a really cool startup called Domino. And then the most recent stop before Bask was I was running this kind of startup incubator in New York where I was the launch GM. And one of our big mandates was, let's go get the best startups in New York. And being New York, a lot of them happen to be direct-to-consumer startups. And that's what put this kind of bug in my head about the idea of doing a direct-to-consumer startup and leveraging a direct relationship with customers to create a brand and compete in categories that were previously assumed to be entrenched. So it was kind of like a winding journey, but I fell in love with this idea of startups. And from the moment I got into startups, I kind of became what I call a wantrepreneur, but I just didn't know what startup I wanted to do. And that, brings us to today.
Tricia, When Mikey's talked about his startup was like a campaign, it reminded me of what you and I always say about doing projects like a campaign. It's such a good experience.
Right. In the way that you're going direct to the consumer. And today it's a whole different ballgame, right? Because people are on Facebook, people are having emails and all that versus 20 years ago, where it might have been a little bit difficult to launch something direct to the consumer in this kind of way.
Yeah, and I think about it. If you wanted to start a toothpaste company 30 years ago, your friends and family would all laugh at you and say, that's impossible. How are you going to compete with Procter and Gamble? They control the distribution. And the really interesting unlock that's happened on the internet over the past couple decades is that you don't need that distribution in retail to get started. You can get started by launching a website on Shopify and creating a brand and going on social media and getting some earned media through PR. And you can build up a base of strong advocates who really love you, but also get a ton of feedback directly from your customers in real time and determine what your product roadmap's going to be and how you're going to fix things and how you're going to position yourself and then grow from there. And you see this across almost every consumer category now, is that over the past decade plus, there's some new emerging group that's competing with these gigantic incumbents and doing so in a really compelling way. And the internet and social media has really made that a thing.
Right. And as Dora said, liking that to a campaign, because that's what we did. It's knocked on every single door. And now you can do it in a much more efficient kind of way.
Yeah. And the other kind of campaign connection too, like if you've ever worked on a campaign out there, like it's your life. Yeah. It's like you eat, sleep, and breathe it. At the first startup, we kept cots, like little mats, like a kid would take a nap on if they're a toddler at school. We kept them under our desk because we were working so late. Then we'd just roll over, sleep under the desk, wake up and do it all again the next day. But we were all having such fun doing it.
Yeah.
And the energy in a startup and the energy within a campaign are very similar in that respect. And also to the respect of it's us against the world. And everyone's really passionate about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
So true.
And it takes a ton of energy. It takes a ton of focus, right? It takes a lot physically out of somebody to want to do a startup. So tell us about you and how this all happened for you. And we were really honored that you shared your story with us, and we'd love to share it with all of our listeners as well.
I was having this thing happen to me. It first happened in 2008, and I remember it really, really vividly. I ate a sandwich at lunch, and I couldn't swallow it. And I came to learn that that's called food impaction. And, over the course of several years, the frequency at which those food impaction episodes would occur was accelerating dramatically. So it happened once, and then it happened every 6 months and every quarter. And then soon it was happening every day and multiple times a day, where I would eat something and I literally, it was stuck in my throat. And over time, my wife, Brittany, was just like, hey, I actually almost don't even feel bad for you anymore because I told you to go to a doctor years ago. And, so she was like, so go to a doctor, dude. And so I finally went, and they did an endoscopy, and they found that I had white blood cells in my esophagus. And that meant that I had this autoimmune disease called eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a relatively new phenomenon that can occur anywhere in your digestive tract. But it made it so that when I would eat food, I couldn't swallow it. And so the next thing that they did was they sent me to an allergist to find out what I was allergic to. It's kind of wild. They did the skin test and my arm lit up like a Christmas tree, and I was allergic to everything. What I had to do after that was really, really clean up my diet and cut out all of these things that, I was in love with eating.
Did you just decide to do that, or did the docs give you guidance on that?
The doctors gave me 3 things to do. One was a steroid that was actually an inhaler that instead of breathing, I would swallow. Then the other was Pepsid AC on steroids, this really, really crazy heartburn medication essentially. And then clean up my diet. And I actually wasn't really in love with the first two parts of it. I didn't really adhere to that part of the diagnosis, but I was cold turkey on the food. So like starting the next day, no gluten, dairy, egg, soy, nuts, banana or strawberry were the things that I was like, and white potato,
And you
really
knew this
allergic
because
to.
it lit up because you did the allergy test.
Because that's what showed us positive in the allergy test. And the really interesting thing about this, and now I'm this huge believer in kind of food as medicine, I changed my diet. First of all, the autoimmune disease went away. They did an endoscopy a year and a half later, and there was no trace of eosinophils in my esophagus. So, I ate my way into an autoimmune disease, and then I ate my way out of the autoimmune disease.
Amazing.
And the other interesting thing that happened was that I started to lose a bunch of weight and like was getting all these compliments on like, oh my gosh, are you on a diet? And I was like, wow, can I recommend autoimmune diseases to you as a weight loss methodology? And that just like planted the seed for me that I really wanted to fix my health in general. And so from there, I started exercising on a very, very regular basis and continued to take my diet very, very seriously. And I started to focus on mental health and wellness as well. I did a ton of meditation and journaling and yoga. And those three things together, like really, really changed my life. And I would say like my energy, my focus, my confidence, all just like 180-degree turns. And it was really life-changing for me.
That's so amazing to hear. And again, to inspire others, as you say, it's like food really is our medicine. And Dora and I talk a lot about it. Is it's either the slow way to die or a quick way to live a healthier, longer life. And it's like you discovered it kind of a hard way, but now you're
Now you
doing
have
it
the
and you're on the
energy.
path. Talk to us about the ADHD. You said that as a kid you had that, and now how does that show up for you?
Well, as a kid, but also as an adult, if you ask my wife, in the early years of our marriage, it's kind of hard to live with an ADHD person. Like you don't close the cabinets in the pantry and you leave things all over the house and you have no idea how to manage your time, but it can be kind of debilitating. And so, one of the other things that I don't do anymore that I did for years was I took either Adderall and then Vyvanse. And I found that when I was on Adderall and Vyvanse, like I couldn't do anything creative. I would always get like lost in these like deep rabbit holes of things that weren't important. Like I'd get into like the deepest parts of Wikipedia, but I also couldn't have conversations with people. I would just like never shut up. And part of changing what I ate and committing myself to habitual daily exercise, like rewired my focus. Doing like an intense workout in the morning and not eating, crappy processed foods all the time that, frankly, I was allergic to, made it so much easier for me to focus on the things that I needed to do and, be able to read a page in a book without picking up my phone 30 times to check my Instagram notifications. It was like a really important and foundational shift for me. I haven't taken ADHD medication in 4 or 5 years now at this point.
Wow, that's incredible. I think it's also another way of talking about how you healed your gut. Kind of all starts there, right?
I'm like such a believer in gut health and the gut-mind connection. It's so important. And I'll give you another example with my son who's 3 and he's got, some developmental delays early on. And one of the things that we did with him was we did a stool test and it came back and it had all these biomarkers that were concerning and overpopulation of some bad bacteria and some missing good bacteria. And we put him on a probiotic. We had him on a great probiotic, but it didn't address those specific things. We put him on a new probiotic and it was like game changing. It was such a leap for him in a really short period of time. And we saw so much progress. It was literally the only thing that we changed. And, we started to incorporate, we tried to get 30 different types of fruits and vegetables into his diet every single week. And I was a believer. After this experience, I am such a believer in the mind and gut connection. But I think a really interesting takeaway from that I learned is that we're all unique.
Yes.
He was on a probiotic, just wasn't the right one for him.
Right.
And everybody's body and everybody's stomach and everybody's mind, they're all different. And you got to create a plan for yourself that is specific to you and to your needs.
No, that's so true. We talk a lot about bioindividuality, and no one is exactly the same. And especially when the little ones come out, right, of the birth canal, they're being inoculated by their mom. So everybody's a little bit different. And that's why we do need to pay attention to our microbiome. That's super cool,
100%.
though, that your pediatrician is into that, though. Or did you suggest it?
This was kind of just like something that we started researching on our own.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And we use this company I think it's called Tiny Health.
Mm-hmm.
And basically you just take like a little, your kid goes in the diaper and you just put it in a vial and you send it back and they give you this robust data set about what they find.
Cool.
And they give you a bunch of insights about it. And then, we tested all the insights, on like ChatGPT, but also to our doctors as well. And I think good doctors are very aware of the idea that like it's a whole body type of thing. It's natural and medical. And we found that was really important for our son. And I have lived through it too.
Right.
Imagine if you hadn't had your own health issue. Your life and the life of your baby would be completely different.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I actually can't stress it enough. Like, I don't think that I would have had the energy and confidence and the resilience to start this company had it
Yes.
not been going through that experience with my own health and then changing my life. They say the obstacle is the way, right?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
That
True.
created a new path for me that unlocked this like dream that I always had of starting my own business and never, always had kind of failure to launch with it. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. And I think without that change in lifestyle and diet, like,
You
I
wouldn't
don't know
have.
if it happens.
That's so inspirational.
So
really
inspirational.
amazing.
So let's talk about this dream, this launch, and there's a story behind that, why you started Bask.
Yes. So I think kind of like, again, the obstacle was the way. I lost my uncle to skin cancer. He and I were really, really close. He was, in many ways, my idol, just a fantastic person. And the energy that would light up every single room that he walked into. When he passed away, he was a writer for the New York Post. The headline was, "The Post loses its Renaissance man." So this was like something that was a real eye-opening event in my life. And frankly, he had a melanoma. It was on his back. It spread into his spine. It got into his brain. And it was pretty quick. And it was super traumatic.
How old were you when your uncle passed?
I had just graduated from college. So I think I was like 23 at the time. It was a great, like, eye-opening experience for me because I had never really taken my sun safety seriously before that. I'm like a fair-skinned, like, half Irish kid. We would always joke around, me and my friends, about like, oh, we got to get our base burn for the summer, and all this like terrible stuff. But I ended up doing a ton of research about skin cancer, and there were two things that really stood out to me that kind of blew my mind. Number one, skin cancer is more diagnosed than all other cancers combined, despite how objectively preventable it is. Number two, is that 54% of Americans never wear sunscreen under any circumstance, despite the fact that it is a proven and widely available prophylactic for the disease. And I just thought, like, that is such a miss. That is such a miss. And the next step actually wasn't launching Bask. And I kind of joke around that Bask was an accident. And in many ways it was. But the first thing that we did was we started a nonprofit, and it's called the Skin Protection Foundation, SPF for short. And the whole idea was we're going to be the first organization in the world that fights skin cancer on the front lines by going to beaches and public parks and giving people sunscreen for free and telling them why they should use it, but like literally arming them with this thing when they needed it. It was only when I went to go find a sunscreen partner that I was doing my diligence, and I was in the aisle of a CVS in Bethany Beach, Delaware. And I was like, holy crap, sunscreen sucks. You know, and I had discussed, like, I was very into this whole idea of direct to consumer startups. I was like, this is an archetypal category to do that. And we have commoditized brands, really stodgy branding, questionable ingredients, really bad messaging. And I think the messaging is super, super important because, you know, throughout this 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and well into the 90s, sunscreen was always positioned as this, like, here's a way to get tan without getting burned. And I think it really fed into this, like, toxic
Like the
beauty
copper
standard.
tone one, right? Like yeah.
Which, by the way, like, think about what the name of that business
Copper
is.
tone,
Copper
yeah.
plus tone.
Right.
And they had an ad, I don't know if you remember, but it was like, don't be a pale face with an exclamation point, just like taunting people not to be pale. You know, so what we had decided, and my wife is my co-founder and she's brilliant creatively. What we decided was, well, what if we build a better for you sunscreen wrapped in a beautiful brand that's really vibrant and happy and gets people excited about wearing sunscreen? What if we change the messaging in sun care and turn it from this, like, boring chore your mom forced you to do when you were a kid into something that's fun and fashionable and cool? What if we allowed people to look at their skin and their skin tone and love it for what it is? And then what if we take the proceeds from this sunscreen company and use it to broaden our mission and support skin cancer nonprofits? And we launched it in National Sunscreen Day, for those who celebrate, in 2021. And to some great fanfare. We actually just turned 3 yesterday, and it's been an amazing 3 years.
How did you come up with Bask, the name Bask?
You know what? It might sound kind of counterintuitive, right? Because bask is, like to bask in the sun.
Right.
Which I think your mind might take you immediately to this idea of, like, laying out, tanning. But what we really wanted to celebrate was sunshine. We think sunshine's important. You shouldn't coop yourself inside. Like, sunshine is so important for our health and our happiness. I live here in South Florida, and, I love the sunshine, and I am outside as much as I possibly can be. But we wanted people to love the sun, but to love it in a safe and healthy way. So that's the reason for the name.
So amazing what you've created. And as you said, it's such an inclusive way of saying to yourself, just get out in the sun and have fun, enjoy it, don't fear it. This whole idea of how we embrace life, kind of, as you said at the very beginning, how we can keep ourselves healthy and strong. A really good way to do that is to be in the sun, but do it with a great sunscreen. It makes a lot of sense, and it moisturizes your skin at the same time.
Yes. If you go to basksuncare.com at checkout, enter health gig, one word, and it's 20% off of your next Bask order.
Wow.
Thank
you for that. That's awesome.
Yeah, happy to.
We have covered so much today, but there's so much more to talk about. So join us next week for the second part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on Health Gig. We loved having you with us. We hope you'll tune in again next week. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast and follow us on healthgigpod.com. I'm Tricia.
And I'm Doro.
Be well.